This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Welcome to Teach Talk Radio. You're here with your hosts, Krupa and Nazya. This evening, we'll be exploring how to navigate multilingual teaching and learning with our guest, Joanna Colata.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening, friends. You're joining us tonight after, I think it was a couple of months we've had off. Summer. How have you been, Krupa?
Really well, thanks. Summer flew, as it always does. Had an early holiday, which was really quite nice with the family, and picked up a book, read, and found this new space, thinking about discovering liminal spaces and what that actually means, and feeling comfortable with transition and change and what happens during that period, and navigating that better. So really, really enjoyed the summer, flew really quickly, and then went straight back into being functional mum again and trying to get my eldest through exams and all sorts of fun things. So yeah, a bit of this, a bit of that. How about you? How have you been?
It's been quite an interesting couple of months, actually. Obviously, after the riots and things in August, there's just been a lot of discussions around the dining room table, and with my colleagues, and we've just had some really interesting discussions around socioeconomic inclusion, and how as leaders we can really drive that forward in our settings.
Absolutely.
And I think that from me, the real value lies in creating opportunities to grow and improve for everyone by moving away from performative allyship. And that involves consistent trying from behind the scenes efforts towards meaningful equity. And part of that is providing safe forums to air issues and feedback, so nothing lingers or is swept under the carpet. So that's been quite, I think that's really important, and it's a discussion that's ongoing.
I agree, and I think there is something around tokenistic, exclusive conversations and events, and I think while they hold value, I also always sort of question, well, actually, why are we still talking about it at that level when it should be embedded, and it should be feeling far more comfortable in terms of doing right, and being just in our approaches. And I feel a bit like, well, hang on, we've been talking this for a mighty long time. There's mammoth amounts of research and data. Why is this such an exclusive conversation? Why have we not moved on from that? We've spoken about it. We hear the frustrations. We see the physical impact of it, and the emotional impact of it. But yet, it's still not good enough. It's still not deeply entrenched into our practice and in classrooms. And I think, actually, what does that mean for a young person in the classroom if that adult isn't being seen or heard or respected for who they are and how they show up? So I feel an element of frustration that we still have to have these separate things to discuss it, when actually we should be knee deep into really meaningful implementation, and from that drawing on the feedback and saying, right, let's do better. So yeah, I'm a bit sick of the tokenistic stuff. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah. So let's get started with today's show. We're going to be moving straight on to the adverts, and straight after we're going to be interviewing our amazing guest, Joanna. She's got a wealth of experience around what EAL / multilingual learning, and I think it'll be a really great show, so keep listening.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
In today's show, we welcome Joanna Carlotta, and she has got some great insights into EAL, and so we're really looking forward to this interview. Hi, Joanna. How are you doing?
Hello, good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
We want you to introduce yourself to our listeners. So if you could tell us a little bit about your journey as an educational practitioner, please.
Thank you. So my journey as an educational practitioner began with a BA in English Philology. And this degree gave me a real insight into the English language, but also it provided me with a QTS. So essentially, I was a trained teacher, English as a foreign language teacher. Later on, I moved from Poland to the UK, and I pursued further studies. I studied masters in English literature, and what was great about that degree, it was a very flexible degree. So I had a level of flexibility with when it came to choosing my options and seminars, and I was still able to continue to develop my knowledge about the linguistics. So I combined literature, which I love, but also the love of linguistics. So that was extremely interesting, exciting, but also, as it turned out, useful for my further career. And over the years, I've had the privilege of working in many settings, and I've worked all the way from primary all the way to tertiary education. For a very brief moment, I worked as an English as a foreign language teacher in Poland, but later on, mainly I worked in the UK, England. I worked with students in college settings. So I delivered ESOL courses. I worked with adults delivering English for academic purposes courses, and I worked with students who were getting ready for their undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in England. But for the vast majority of my career, I have worked in inner city schools, and I worked mainly with teenagers, Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. Currently, I work as the curriculum leader for multilingual learners in one of the inner city schools in Leeds. And it's an absolute joy and privilege to work in a school where there are so many students who speak so many different languages, who have got English as an additional language, but essentially are multilingual learners. And my role involves designing, but also implementing a curriculum for EAL learners across the school. I work very closely with teachers, other curriculum leaders in terms of developing best practice for EAL learners. So we collaborate a lot. We work on introducing, developing, trialing techniques and strategies that are the best for our multilingual learners. And we do that with a view of absolute and total inclusivity. So we want to be as inclusive as possible, ensuring that our students get the best curriculum, but also that the curriculum is accessible, not only available, but accessible to all learners, regardless of their linguistic background, regardless of their previous educational backgrounds. So that's, in a nutshell, me as an educational practitioner, where I started and where I am now.
Wow, what a journey. And it seems like it's I mean, it feels like it all makes sense, but also I bet you didn't know it was going to fall into this as you were going on the journey, and actually how important it is to be able to use your degree and all the practice that you've gone through, but build that into strategies within the classroom. That's really, really, really fascinating. How do you sort of I've got two questions in my head. That's why I'm pausing. I've got two questions. I'm going to go with the first one, and then I'll go with the second one. So I'm going to ask you what hooked you into EAL and thinking broadly about supporting young people on this journey. And then I'm going to ask you about the staff and how they have received it. So please do share your thinking there. Oh God, I'm so excited. This is great.
So as I've mentioned, my initial training was in English as a foreign language. So essentially, it would be the same as modern foreign language, whether it's Spanish or French or German, in England. So I'm a trained English language teacher, but obviously there is a certain distinctiveness to EAL. And what sparked my interest into EAL was my first position in one of the inner city schools in England, where the vast majority of students, I think over 70% of students, were students who had English as an additional language. And obviously, I've had a really good linguistic background that I could then utilize and I could further develop. So it did help me a lot, but at the same time, it was a huge learning curve, because English as a foreign language is essentially something that is taught to students regardless of their age, something that they can use, for example, when they go on holidays and they can have a conversation in a shop, or obviously higher levels as well. But in terms of English as an additional language, we are talking about students who are learning mainstream curriculum, but at the same time are developing the English language. So they are, it's a sort of double whammy, if you like, because they are doing two things at the same time. So they are learning cognitively demanding things in a language that is not yet developed. So those both things are essentially intertwined, and it takes a lot of skilled practitioners, teachers, to help them develop both the language and the content, not separately, but together at the same time.
And then you've got to add the mix of curriculum and different subject matter and how language changes between maths and science, and it all becomes quite tricky, but also so necessary to ensure that the young person is, the way I sort of gauge this is that the young person is learning a culture here with the language, and then there's lots of learning that happens in terms of knowledge, but trying to convert that into the English language or their home languages. that's a real skill. And you made mention of specialist practitioners being able to carve that and support that journey for a young person. What sort of things do you prepare the practitioners to start thinking like that? Because you want every member in your setting to really think like that, because that young person is moving from class to class. So you want to share that really good practice. So what does that sort of conversation look like with the practitioners?
I think it always should, I don't know whether should is too strong a word, but I think it always should start with ensuring that every single member of staff, because as you mentioned, it takes every single member of staff to ensure that a student is successful. I think it always should start with a vision that we have for our school and for our young people who are in front of us in our classrooms. And this is exactly how I started in my current school. It's not necessarily me, it's we started with ensuring that we are on the same page, that we understand what is good practice, what makes young people successful, those students who are learning English who have English as an additional language. And there's been a lot of change, not only in recent years, but even if we look back sort of 20, 30 years ago, and our understanding of what makes inclusive, good, effective practice has changed, and it has changed in a positive way. We know that for our young learners to be successful, we need to ensure that they are included in mainstream lessons. And there used to be time where they were sort of separated and they had to first learn English in order then to join mainstream classrooms. And of course, there is that scope still for language support sessions or interventions, if you would like to call them. But I think understanding that what students need, they need to be in mainstream lessons, because this is where you have skilled practitioners, you have got experts in particular subjects, and this is where students are exposed to those academic conversations, academic vocabulary, challenging texts. But obviously then it takes someone who is a language specialist to ensure that the curriculum is accessible to students. Because one thing to remember about multilingual learners, EAL learners, is the fact that they are not a homogeneous group. We are talking about students who could be new to English, not necessarily new to education. They could have excelled the education in their own country, but they might be new to English. But we're also talking about students who are advanced bilingual learners, and they still need that help and support in order to be successful, fully successful at GCSE. We are talking about students who might have had disruptive education, who might be dealing with some traumas. But one thing that unites us is having those high expectations for the students, but also having high support for them. So it's not only about high expectations, but ensuring that every single member of staff knows how to adapt their instruction, how to adapt language without simplifying the content, without watering it down, keeping it very challenging, but also making it attainable to students essentially. So I would say that it always should start with every single member of staff understanding that we are working together. We need to be very consistent with the things we do in our classrooms. But then obviously making sure that the instruction is appropriate for our students. So for example, working collaboratively with members of staff and ensuring that we have appropriate strategies and techniques for a science lesson, which might be a little bit different than an English lesson. And there's a wide variety of strategies and techniques that we can employ. But I think always at the forefront of what we do should be the premise that content and language are intertwined, and we should pay attention to both of them at the same time, particularly if we have a lot of multilingual learners in our classrooms. But even if it's just one student, we need to ensure that language is not an add-on. It doesn't happen at the end of our planning, but it's fully integrated in what we do. So knowing our learners is essential. Obviously, data is important when we have English proficiency levels, but also knowing the students in terms of knowing them as a person, knowing their stories, and understanding where they're coming from, where they are in their journey, and making sure that we are as inclusive as possible in our mainstream classrooms.
What hooked you into EAL? And I want you to think broadly about this in terms of um, what it meant for you to support young people on their journey.
As I've mentioned, it sort of started when I began working in one of the inner city schools, secondary schools in Leeds. And what I witnessed there was quite a lot of challenges that the students had to face. Especially those students who were new to English, those students who had some disrupted education, but at the same time, as long as you know, it was kind of sometimes difficult to support them. It was quite difficult, especially if students joined at Key Stage 4, for example, and they were new to English. Everybody else was getting ready and gearing up towards GCSE exams. We still wanted to support those young learners to ensure that they have the best outcomes possible. So we can talk about challenges, but I think for me, more importantly, is to talk about the successes I've witnessed. And it was really a kind of a tangible change that I witnessed happening in front of me. And I could talk about so many learners, and these, some people could say, were anecdotal stories, but I think there were so many of them that actually they are not just anecdotal stories. They are, you know, real people, real success stories in front of you. I distinctly remember a student who started with us actually in Key Stage 4, and I was doing the admissions meeting for that particular family. There were 3 siblings. And I thought they were extremely quiet. They didn't speak a lot. They were new to English. And I thought to myself, this is going to be very difficult. The boys joining year 10, I worried. And you know what? 2 years later, because he joined us at the very beginning of year 10, he actually was one of the best students in his class. He was new to English, but the sheer determination and motivation and the effort that he put in his studies, it was absolutely phenomenal. And the change I witnessed, you know, him growing from that quiet person during an admissions meeting to a young man at the end of year 11 who was receiving the results, and it was just beyond anything I imagined. So with the right support, it just shows that students can achieve a lot.
And the thing is, it's about not viewing EAL from a deficit model, because that is, I think, the downfall. And that's what I remember as a child myself. So from someone from a global majority background is, oh, this young person needs support, but actually it's got nothing to do with cognitive functioning.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
I may need support in helping me to, and I didn't, because I speak my language more poorly than I speak in English. I think in English and I speak in English. When I have to say something in our own language, I really have to think about the structure of the sentence and where I place the noun and the verb. And so, but that's an amazing skill to have, to be able to really communicate and change the way you communicate with different people, and thinking, and that thought process and the processes your brain goes through in order to be able to communicate that in different ways to different people. That's an amazing skill to
It
have. That's
is,
something to be
yes.
celebrated.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you've mentioned that the level of the English language that the student is currently at is not indicative of their cognitive ability. And very often we do have students who might be new to English, but actually they've studied so many other things in their own countries that when they join us, they already know those things. So, you know, they're almost like ahead of the curriculum that they are studying currently. And also, we are very mindful of using different terms. And I know the official term is English as an additional language, but I think when we use the term multilingual students, it's sort of asset-based rather than deficit-based, because many of those students, they speak multiple languages, and English is just an additional language that they are adding to their repertoire. And there's research that shows that knowing one language or 2 languages actually facilitates learning the English language in a much quicker way, and students accelerate and excel actually at acquiring another language. They've already got a lot of linguistic repertoire, and it's very important that we promote and enable the use of first languages. It is so crucial that we show our young people that your first language is your identity. It's part of who you are. So when you join our school, we don't expect you to leave your identity, your language, and your culture at the door. Please bring it to our school. We want to celebrate it. We want you to use your language as far as possible. And we want to affirm who you are. In my school, we run sessions who are directed and addressed to families who are multilingual, and we invite them to school. We discuss the benefits of being multilingual, and the level of agency that the families have is absolutely phenomenal, and how proud they are, how, of the cultural background, linguistic background, and they want to carry on. They see the value in maintaining the first language and languages, and obviously adding English is something that is important too. But learning English does not have to happen at the expense of any other languages and your own identity. And it is crucial that we as schools take that stance. And during admissions meetings that I attend, I always pretty much say, this is my first sentence, we are a multilingual school. There are 50 different languages and dialects spoken here. We value the language and the culture you're bringing and adding to our school.
That's really beautiful. I think just to unpack that further, I wonder, and I just want to understand where that deficit thinking had or has come from. So I can see where we're going, and I can see why that's important. Completely agree with that. And there are studies that show even young babies, when they sort of have exposure to various languages, how it builds amazing pathways, neurological pathways, and actually supports them with their cognition and learning as they develop. But I think the stigma it comes from when young people come here and then in displaced sort of where they live, they're displaced. And so that trauma part of it, when they're staying in hotels or they're not sort of working out where their journey looks like, that's the stories that I think mainstream probably hear about. And that gap is incredibly important. So by the time they're here, they're placed in a hotel, trying to work out what's going on. They could have come from a place of war, a place of trauma, there's civil war, whatever may be going on in that young person's life. They stay somewhere, and then until they get a placement, and then they're in a new school without their friends. So I think that stigma is around that journey, but not every journey is that journey. And that's what we need to be mindful of, and that's what you both have articulated so beautifully, that yes, there are stories like that, and yes, we do need to be trauma informed, and yes, we do need to understand that it's about the human feeling safe, and that includes the guardians, the parents, the carer. There might be a child that's labelled as looked after. Those things are fine, but they also come with, like you say, a connotation with that, and so it's really important that it's almost addressed immediately. Now that's the journey. This is what's happened, but this is where we're going. This is how we're going to support that to ensure that they're feeling safe, because when they're feeling safe, they're going to then be able to be more exploratory in terms of language, and then hopefully retaining that in some way, shape or form. So I just wanted to unpack that quite explicitly, because I think there is a space for it, but actually it's how that's delivered, and that's not every case. And actually there is probably more success stories out there than there are probably not, potentially, now that we've got such good knowledge that's being shared. Right, we are knee deep in this conversation, but we now need to have a break. So we will be right back in a few moments, and we will be talking to you some more, Joanna. So thank you so much for sharing your insight. See you in a minute.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development program, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Future Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurecareers.com and subscribe today. Future Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports that the Scottish Government has been defeated in a vote calling on ministers to expand free school meals to all primary school pupils. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth said the government was committed to the universal rollout of the free meals, but that funding was not available due to financial pressures. The Scottish Government said the expansion would be limited to P6 and P7 pupils in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment, after First Minister John Swinney confirmed £500 million worth of cuts. The government cited prolonged Westminster austerity and record inflation as the main reasons for the funding gap. Scottish Conservative education spokesperson Liam Kerr submitted a motion calling on the government to give the meals to all primary pupils this parliamentary session, as promised, and said the SNP had shamefully betrayed Scotland's poorest pupils. The non-binding motion passed by 64 votes to 2. 60 abstentions were recorded. Children's Commissioner Nicola Killian said the rollback on universal free school meals was a broken promise to children, and that the move would exacerbate stigma and shame around free school meals. Schools Week covers the Education and Skills Funding Agency, which will be integrated into the core Department for Education by March next year. The move will happen over 2 stages and give schools a single point of contact for financial management and support. The ESFA is currently an executive agency of the Department for Education. Schools' financial support and oversight function will transfer from October the 1st and be brought together with the Regions Group, 9 areas overseen by regional directors. This will support the launch of regional improvement teams by January. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said this will provide a single seamless voice to schools and ensure that financial improvement is central to school improvement. Funding and assurance functions will be centralised on March 31st next year, when the ESFA will close. Set up in 2017, the agency is responsible for delivering and assuring £75 billion worth of funding for 25,000 educational settings. But the ESFA is the second education-related quango to be axed under the new government. The Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education is expected to close by April. ASCL have welcomed the changes if it produces a more efficient and joined-up approach to the oversight of school and college funding, but also said it would not solve the overriding problem that the current level of school and college funding is totally inadequate. The TES says that there are serious dangers in assuming schools are back to normal post-COVID. This is according to a report commissioned by Head Teachers and Leaders Union ASCL. Tim Oates, Group Director of Assessment Research and Development at Cambridge University Press and Assessment, writes in the report that schools are still dealing with challenges. The report warns that schools will continue to see challenges unfold for the next 5 to 10 years, as children whose development was impacted by the pandemic move through the system. The paper comes as 5 children's rights organisations has called on the government to remove the long shadow of the pandemic from children's lives. The report says the range of problems include increasing absence, widened attainment gaps, impacted reading and maths progress for certain groups, and worsening mental health and social and emotional skills. It also warns of research showing that children who were born or were very young during the pandemic face diminished social, cognitive and language development. Mr. Oates says the government must urgently work to remedy these problems rather than accepting them. A Department for Education spokesperson said it is determined to improve the life chances of all children. Finally, in the USA, KSBY News reports that California proposes a ban on large loads of homework in public schools. Assembly member Pilar Schiavo has authored the Healthy Homework Act, which would not ban homework, but which would mandate local school boards and educational agencies to establish homework policies that consider impacts on students' physical and mental health, with input from parents, teachers and students. The proposal comes as a survey of more than 300,000 American students, conducted by Stanford University, shows that 45% of students say workload and homework are their number one causes of stress. And 13,000 California high school students who took the survey report an average of 2.5 hours of homework every night. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Welcome back. Just returning back to our really hearty conversation, and actually much needed conversation, not just for EAL, although that's the focus. Actually, imagine if we had some really interesting strategies that we could use for all learners. I bet we're going to hear some wonderful insights around that too. So let's carry on with our conversation. Are you feeling ready, Mary?
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. So I'd like to ask, how do you navigate any cultural or language differences?
That is a very good question. I would also add, how do we navigate differences, but also similarities? Because very often we focus or we notice things that are different, but it's also great and it's also very useful to focus on what's the same and what binds us and what brings us together. We work in very diverse schools, and this is something that is not going to change. We work in schools that are linguistically diverse and culturally diverse, and it is something that I personally think, but also I believe many people will agree with me, we should celebrate. We should go though beyond that tokenistic celebration of having a one-day culture day, something that happens just once a year and not much thought is put into the organization of the day. Obviously, we should have things like that. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think navigating the cultural and linguistic differences is something that should be happening every day in our classrooms and outside of our classrooms. So first of all, I think teachers should be aware of students in front of them. So I always say that we should learn more about our students and we should learn as much about our students as possible. So being culturally sensitive and aware, I think, is one of the steps to creating those inclusive classrooms. And it could simply start by chatting to students and asking them about the languages they speak. And usually there will be languages they speak, not just one language. Many of them speak many languages, and asking them about their cultures, and bringing those cultures and languages into classrooms and informing and forming part of our curriculum. One of the great things of navigating differences and similarities is ensuring that the students are sort of the expert of the culture that we are talking about. So, for example, in my school, we asked the English department introduced a text called I Am Malala. We have a lot of students who speak Urdu, and actually they do act as experts in terms of explaining certain cultural nuances, explaining the vocabulary used in the book. Similarly, we have a lot of Nigerian students, and we are studying Purple Hibiscus, written by a Nigerian writer. And straight away, you can see the faces, light up, and the students are able to engage in those meaningful conversations. But their culture is suddenly represented in the classrooms, mainstream classrooms, and this is so important. This is so uplifting. In terms of navigating the linguistic differences, this comes down to ensuring that all teachers are aware how to support multilingual learners. And very often we talk about students who are new to English or at the early stages of acquiring the English language. But I think we should go beyond it and make sure that we understand how to support all students, those students who are advanced bilingual as well. So creating those inclusive classrooms, the classrooms where the students are represented, where they feel that they belong to that community, is crucial. Obviously, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It takes the understanding. It takes some effort. But I think ensuring that we know our students, ensuring that we have books that represent those students, those mirrors, windows, and doors, so important. And that could extend beyond mainstream classrooms. I think libraries are also great places. They are wonderful places. In my current school, I was also responsible for building sort of the resources in the library, and having books that students enjoy reading, but also books that represent their cultures. It is so powerful. Additionally, having books in different languages. The number of students who come to the library and ask for books in their first languages because they want to read it, for example, with their parents, or they admit, Miss, I can't read that language, but my mum can. I would like to read it with my mum. This is absolutely beautiful. So it's not only mainstream classrooms, but also what happens beyond them is really important.
That's really lovely to hear. So just to expand on some of the examples you've already given, can you share some effective strategies that practitioners can use with multilingual learners to support their academic learning?
I think we very often hear the sentence that says, every teacher is a language teacher. And I absolutely do agree, every teacher is a language teacher, but I also think that every teacher needs to be an effective language teacher. And what that means is, what is your context? Because your teaching might be a little bit different if you have the vast majority of students who are advanced bilingual learners, or sort of at the competency levels, let's say C, so developing competence. But your teaching might look different if suddenly you have 5 new students who are new to English or at the early stages of acquiring the English language. So context is key, I think, in our understanding of how we can support multilingual learners in mainstream classrooms. So first of all, I would say make sure that as a teacher, you know the students in front of you. Don't just assume. Be informed. Be informed about your students. Don't assume that a quiet student does not understand, because actually their understanding of the English language might be far greater than we think. and their literacy skills might be really well developed. At the same time, don't assume that a student who is very talkative and is eager to contribute to classroom discussions is as strong in reading and writing. So I think we should, obviously, we don't want to differentiate to the extent of creating multiple worksheets and levels. We want to teach the whole class, and that involves very careful linguistic scaffolding. So one thing that we can do and have to do as teachers, we have to scaffold the content, but also we have to think about scaffolding the language that is needed in our classrooms. So there are loads of different strategies, and I think they can be sort of grouped into different categories, but at the same time they will change depending on what you're teaching, who you're teaching, and the levels of students. So I think we don't have enough time, unfortunately, for me to go through all the strategies that could be implemented. But I think some of them that could be, first of all, make sure that you make things more accessible and easier rather than simpler. Make sure that you focus on explicitly teaching key vocabulary. There's a lot of vocabulary that students will learn incidentally, so just because they are in mainstream classrooms. But I think that certain level of being explicit in terms of teaching vocabulary is key. And we need to be very strategic at choosing the vocabulary, because obviously we cannot teach every single word, but choosing maybe 3 or 4 words that are taught explicitly during the lesson is key. Make sure that students are exposed to high quality texts, and the vocabulary as well is there. But think about how you're going to make sure the students are able to understand it. So be proactive, think about your lessons before, and it could start with previewing vocabulary. It could start with providing a very short summary of the text you're going to read. Be aware of those idiomatic expressions, cultural references that we sometimes might assume that students know about, and be explicit. So design success. Don't just assume it will happen, but start designing the success. Simple things like providing sentence starters. They take that cognitive load of students, because then they can focus on what they want to say as opposed to how they want to say it. Modeling, being very explicit, building in opportunities for the students to use the same vocabulary in different activities, moving from speaking to reading to writing, designing the success. And I always tell, whenever I work with teachers, and obviously there is a lot of pressure for teachers to ensure that the students progress, that they move to the next step. But I always tell teachers, let's just take one step at a time. It's not your role, it's not your job to teach the student English in 2 weeks. And it might sometimes feel that the progress is quite slow, but actually I often ask teachers, can you think about this particular student? It's July now. Can you think about April and think about January? And suddenly we can see the progress in terms of students developing their language, but also understanding, because understanding of the content, because essentially that's what needs to happen. The students need to develop the understanding of the content. And that's why earlier I mentioned the consistency. It's the job of the whole school and every single teacher to ensure that good EAL practice is embedded in every single classroom. Focusing explicitly on language functions, for example. So if students can compare and contrast in science, and they are focusing, I don't know, on animal and plant cells, and they are comparing and contrasting, if that language is taught explicitly, meaning the teacher models, for example, the words that are used when we talk about similarities, and then how we structure sentences when we talk about differences. This is such an important part, because if the next lesson is geography, and if they are comparing and contrasting different landscapes, let's say, that science teacher has already helped the geography teacher and the students in that geography lesson. in terms of developing and acquiring the language. And it is crucial that we are not complacent, because research tells us that it takes about 2 to 3 years to develop that conversation in English if you are new to English. And very often students are very confident in sort of that playground talk, but it takes even up to 7 years to develop academic language. So if somebody joins in Key Stage 3, essentially they have to make like a year and a half year of progress in order just to catch up with their peers. But because their language is developing, so is everybody else's. So it's always kind of like trying to catch, a moving target. So let's not be complacent. Let's make sure that that language development is always at the forefront of what we do.
Really fascinating, and you're quite right, because I think is it 2 or 3 levels of progress that we sort of make mention of when we think about general progress for young people in a mainstream setting, for example. And you do lose sight that it's a moving target. So actually, if you're starting from where one might feel, or maybe labeled as not being on par, or behind, or below average, or below whatever the language is in that setting, it comes back to a deficit model again, doesn't it? So and then interestingly, you're trying to build this young person to feel that sense of belonging, but to do that, they need to feel confident and safe. And how do you build confidence if they're learning something that feels so different? So there's lots of layers. It's not just EAL. There's so many layers that are interleaved within this whole process about who they are, their identity, not losing sight of that, bringing in relatability, but that all comes with the competency of the team that are bringing these things together. And then you don't want to lose that sense of self-efficacy and agency. It's a lot, isn't it? It's all important. So you can't really drop one thing to allow another thing to move forward. So I think the concept of where you share, it's a journey, and allowing the journey to be. And
absolutely.
taking your time and then measuring the progress as opposed to where they should be. The attainment actually is plenty, and that is so much more meaningful but they're not on par with their peers. And that's still not, it's just not helpful, really, is it? And actually they may do it at some point, but even those that do have English as a first language may not be at the levels that may be that expected of their age group or whatever. So can you see that sometimes that there are some gaps that need to be thought through, and just being really aware of those sort of assessments that we might be putting in place, and actually who is it really for, would be my big question.
Yes. Yeah. I think as educators, we sort of get entangled into data and measuring, which we do. I understand we do have to, but I sometimes say, well, let's take a look at that new student in year 7. He speaks 2 languages. He's already learning another one. He's in a different country, and look how brilliant he is. And he's only 12. Let's take that into perspective. When he is 20, he is going to be literate in 2 or 3 languages. And I know sometimes, like you say, it's a journey and it does take time, but we need to allow for that journey to take place and happen. But obviously with skilled educators, teachers, and understanding also how language develops, understanding that it's not a linear process, it's not from A to B, but it's a complex, lengthy process. But with the right support, things do fall into place. They do not fall into place. They are designed to fall into place. It might look like, because obviously we cannot just say that students need to be in mainstream lessons. Yes, but just because they're in mainstream lessons, it doesn't mean that they will necessarily develop that academic language. It needs to happen by design. So it's kind of both sides need to happen, need to take place.
There's lots of discussions around the different approaches that we should take within education, and DEI has become a big focus point. Looking at teaching and learning from a trauma-informed lens has also become quite, let's say, trendy as well. Is there any kind of current emerging issues which you think are pertinent that need to be addressed when it comes to this field? and this aspect of teaching and learning?
I think one of the things that really needs a lot of attention is ensuring that teachers are supported in terms of developing their understanding and practice of supporting multilingual learners, because from the research, from the reports that are available, but also from just speaking to different teachers across the country, really, there is that trend emerging that there isn't enough support, there isn't enough training. And I know it's very contextualized, because some schools do have a lot of multilingual learners. Some schools might not, might have two or three. But I think one of the things that we need to focus on is ensuring that every single teacher feels confident when they are in the classroom. And yes, in your current school, you might not have many multilingual learners, EAL learners, but look what happens. The situation in the world is so volatile. Some schools did have a lot of Ukrainian students suddenly joining, and there was sort of like a sheer panic of what do we do? How do we support them? We've had some students from Hong Kong joining, asylum seekers, and I think as educators, we need to feel empowered. We mustn't feel that we are not able to support young learners. So I think one of the things that should be addressed is providing really good, strong foundation for every single teacher to ensure that they are ready to teach in multilingual classrooms, because essentially what our classrooms are, they are very much multilingual. Over 50% of the world is multilingual, and we all want to speak different languages. We all want our children to develop different languages. And this is something that is going to be more and more prevalent in our classrooms. We are a multicultural and multilingual society. So educators should know they should have enough theory, I feel, because it's absolutely fascinating, the language development, but also then they should have some practical strategies that are strongly embedded, firmly embedded in a given school, right from the admissions meeting, through induction program, through supporting new to English and advanced bilingual learners. I think that's one of the things that I feel we should focus on.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And I think actually with that, we've got a talent pooling. The number of adults that are surrounding that young person, from the moment they walk into their school, or even before, when they're going through the admissions process, like you said, may have some really insightful, relatable skills that could be drawn in. And actually, it's also supposed to adult and say it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to wear your language, and if you feel comfortable to use it and to bring your whole self into work, but also talent pooling that and seeing how you can support cohorts and things like that. For those that may feel like that's useful. But that brings me nicely on to, and you started answering this question in terms of why is inclusive practice so important for all adults in the young person's life, but also their family holistically, especially when English is their additional language.
Yes, I think that holistic support is absolutely important, and we need to be unified in our mission and in our approach if we want that young person to be successful. There are loads of different factors included, and when we think about schools, obviously we want the students to excel academically, and we want them to be successful in terms of their academic progress. And again, I'll just refer to research that shows that English proficiency levels are the best indicators of that student's potential success. So a lot of things included are obviously important, such as the gender of the students and ethnicity and the language they speak and the literacy levels in the first language. But we need to know that the English proficiency level is the strongest indicator of the student's success. And they will be sitting the same GCSE papers just like everybody else. So it's important that we are relentless in terms of supporting that language development. But also we need to be very mindful about, as you mentioned, that student who comes to our school, we need to be mindful about the student's emotional and social well-being. Again, that sense of belonging, making sure that they are part of the community, they are part of the school. And every single member of staff plays that important role in the students' students' lives, including parents, including carers. So it's so important that we work together, that parental engagement, making sure that we have really strong links, the school and the parents, families united. They say it takes a village. It takes a village, and I think it is true. We look after young children, young adults, for however many hours a day, but we are always stronger if we work together. So ensuring that parental engagement and that agency is developed, and collaboration. I think this is what creates long-term success for those students.
Thank you for that, Joanna. So our question is in two parts. So the first is that can you share any top tips with our listeners with regards to the approach around EAL, not just in the classroom, but as an organization that needs to be embedded into practice, from policy to practice? But also the second part is what part can technology play in this? Because AI and technology is a big thing. Ed tech is big as well at the moment. So your thoughts around that would be great.
So to answer your first question, what ideally would happen in every single school, the language support that we offer and the support we offer to multilingual learners is something that is not an initiative. And I think in this day and age, it cannot simply be an initiative. And what I mean by initiative is sort of something that is introduced, that teachers are expected and encouraged to practice and use for a few days and a few weeks, and then it kind of fades away. I think we have to move beyond a simple initiative to something that is part, and I would call it part of our infrastructure, something that is at the forefront of what we do. And then if we have teachers moving, teachers leaving, new teachers joining, students leaving and joining, that infrastructure is soundly embedded within our school system. So there's that support both for the teachers and for students. And I think that's something that I would say is crucial in terms of supporting multilingual learners, to having really strong foundations, and that shared understanding of what we want for our young learners. So that would be crucial, and of course that starts at the very top. So having supportive SLT, and SLT that is informed and is willing to invest into staff development, developing practice, but also potentially employing a language specialist who can then give that expertise and experience, and support teachers. So that's a very brief answer to your first question. And the second one, AI is obviously fascinating, and there are loads of examples that I could give. And our students do use technology, and it can be very, very useful if used appropriately. One thing I would sort of try not to do at all is try to give students who is new to English a laptop or a device, place them in a mainstream classroom and say, now do this, please get on with your work while I teach the rest of the class. So that's something that is a huge no-no for me. But students can use it for loads of different reasons and in various ways. Something that comes to mind is just some examples. For example, we had a student who was new to English, and we were able to translate a key core text using AI. We translated some communication, and that was sent to parents using AI. And it's actually quite freakishly accurate, because we have teachers who speak different languages, and we sort of just did it as a test. And I asked the teachers to proofread it, and it was absolutely perfect. So we were able actually to send messages to parents in their first languages. So yeah, let's use it. But obviously there's people say, well, we won't need language teachers, right? We won't need to learn another languages because AI can interpret and translate everything. No, I don't think so. But I think it's a very helpful
something that is very helpful if implemented and used appropriately. But I'm afraid I'm not a huge expert on in that field, so just some thoughts.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for your time. It's been really interesting listening to your thoughts around how multilingual practice should change. And it's not just about accommodation and assimilation. It's there needs to be a wider agenda around this. Yeah, it's been great to have you on as a guest. Thank you so much, Joanna.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK. Home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development program, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Future Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Teachers, mark your calendars for BetUK 2025, the world's biggest EdTech event. Join over 30,000 educators at the Excel London from the 22nd to the 24th of January. Discover the latest EdTech innovations, network with peers and access hundreds of hours of CPD. Did we mention it's 100% free for educators? Whether you're looking for inspiration or practical tools to enhance your teaching, BET has it all. Don't miss this opportunity to shape the future of education. Register today at uk.betshow.com. That's uk.betshow.com.
So, welcome back. I hope you all found that interesting. We sure did. Krupa, what were your thoughts?
Lots, really, really interesting, and I can't thank Joanna enough for sharing her wisdom with us. But there's after you hear the conversation, you think, well, actually, there's so much more that we need to delve into here. You know, it just sparks all these other thought processes, and so it looks as though there's a young people who speak English as an additional language. There's over a fifth of those identified young people within each school, but yet it's not explicit in educational policy. And I find that blows my mind. So we've got a statistic. We know that there is a growing number. We know that there's conflict around the world. We know that this pathway has never been more open than it has been now. So I think there's, I don't know, I can't put my words to it, but I almost feel like it's just sort of not, that there's a misalignment here. So I think there's a few things that we need to think about. And I think that it needs to be high quality CPD for all practitioners, with those that, thinking about language differences. It then got me thinking about those that are post 16 or post 19. I've got a particular interest there, and thinking about improving national data around that, as well as effective use of funding for ESOL, and what does standards and qualifications look like, and how can we develop that further? So if we're moving away from the deficit mindset, thinking about the strength or the star mindset and how that can work, I think we need to build in some really tight structures and frameworks around that. And I think that then comes in with developing a national English language strategy on a regional and of course national level. But I then spiraled off and thought, well, what about those in prisons and those in the youth justice service, and what does that look like? Is ESOL or supporting other languages and finding enabling parties to that, of that development, part of the rehabilitation? So there's lots of directions that we can go into, but yes, that's where my brain is at. I don't have any of the answers. I'll add that very, very honestly, but it has got me thinking, well, actually, what more, what next, and how can we do better on a national level? How about you?
Like you, I had several thoughts. One of the things that actually occurred to me, and I think it was through one of the questions you asked around somebody being not embarrassed or shy about speaking their language. And immediately I thought about those people that have come across racism, like on the bus, on the train, when they've been speaking their own language to someone else or on the phone, and then someone comes to them and says, "Oi, you're in Britain, speak British," and then
speak British.
and you think, where has that come from? Why can't I speak in my language? And I remember this happened with my mum. I was very, very young, and it happened with my mum when years and years ago. But and it's still happening now. So I think it's really important for people to hear people speaking other languages and normalizing that in school, so that it helps towards stopping that view of otherism. They're the others. And I think that's again that that kind of filters from what happened with the riots as well. Absolutely. It was all about the others. So yeah, I mean, I had those thoughts about the wider societal impact, and then more towards in terms of schools and how I like this idea of the positive language school, where multilingual students are seen as assets, and you leveraging that to engage with not just the students but the students' families, so we foster a sense of belonging.
Absolutely.
And there was a phrase that was coined, and I read about it on a couple of websites. It was culturally responsive pedagogy or culturally responsive teaching, and I just really loved that phrase. So and then it got me thinking about our intersecting identities.
Absolutely.
And how they shape us, our perspectives, our conversations, our dialogue. Why should we shy away? Why should anyone shy away from that? So, yeah. Final thoughts, Krupa?
Just, you started something. You shouldn't do these things. Now I'm thinking, oh, that's really good. We need to do something about it. And how are we going to go about doing it? And who can we speak to make that happen? But I think it's everyone's business is what we're taking away from it. It's everyone's business, and there's a lot of rich learning for all involved, those that are facilitating and collaborating and thinking about how actually we can work internationally, and thinking about how we can maybe, is it that we think about the assessment in terms of proficiency and English proficiency and what that looks like, and then how do we scale that on a more broader note, so that we are really developing speech and actually seeing that maybe separately or differently to comprehension. And is there a link there? Is there not? Because actually sometimes we're making assumptions that if you can't speak it, perhaps you don't know it, and actually that's not always the case. You can understand concepts and know that quite well. It's just that the articulation of the language that isn't quite there. Anyway, we could talk for days. Clearly, as you can tell, it has been a wonderful evening speaking to you, being here, being back on this show today, and starting with something that's really meaty and really, really something that we need to drive forward together. As Joanna say, and I often say, it does take a village. So Thank you to our little village here.
Yeah. So, friends, our aim always is with this show is to add perspective, agitate concepts, amplify voices and experiences. So, thank you for your engagement and support. Until next time, take care.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.